Ariel Sharon just passed away. He's, of course, in the American media, considered a hero, and by a lot of the politicians in the West as well. Vice President Joe Biden went, Tony Blair, of course, former Prime Minister of Great Britain went, and they were effusive in their praise. Now, I believe Ariel Sharon had a much more mixed record. He did have some positives. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. He also had some significant negatives. A couple of war crimes here and there, some massacres, which, by the way, the Israeli government recognized. So this is not criticism from outside sources. Do you know that the Israeli government banned him from becoming defense minister ever again? So he's like, oh, I can't be defense minister. How about I'll be prime minister? That was a nice little way of getting around that ban. But it wasn't just outside governments. It was also his own government that said what he did was deplorable. So instead, U.S. Vice President Joe Biden goes to the funeral and says this: he was indomitable. But like all historic leaders, all real leaders, he had a North Star that guided him. A North Star from which he never, in my observation, never deviated. His North Star was the survival of the state of Israel and the Jewish people wherever they resided. What's funny is that there was a but in that sentence. I thought he was going to say, you know, he was indomitable, but like all real leaders had some issues. No. But he was also awesome. Now, Juan Cole, great professor out of the University of Michigan, wrote a really interesting article about how Ariel Sharon was held to a different standard than, for example, African leaders. The International Criminal Court considers massacres a war crime, of course, a crime against humanity, and oftentimes tries leaders for those war crimes. Now, they happen to be almost all African leaders, with a couple of Serbian exceptions, right? But when it comes to Ariel Sharon, well, look, Israel didn't sign the treaty, sorry, okay? And you know who else hasn't signed the treaty that would allow people to be brought in front of the International Criminal Court? There's only a handful of countries. There's Israel and the United States. We're really proud. And then there's Syria, of course, and Sudan. Right. We're in such great company. It almost looks like that's a list of people who might have committed war crimes and would not like to be tried for them. Now, the U.S., of course, when it comes to trying other people, say, goddamn war criminals, how dare they, right? Now, Juan Cole points out, by the way, P.W. Botha, who led the apartheid government in South Africa, did cross-border raids. Ariel Sharon did a cross-border war against Lebanon. He killed people who were striving for independence and freedom, black leaders, but he called them terrorists, and he said those terrorists had to be executed. Ariel Sharon executed Palestinian leaders saying they were terrorists. Interesting. How dare anybody bring up this? Professor Cole and myself, we ought to be embarrassed for bringing that up and actually giving a full record of the man. Instead, Tony Blair is going to go in a different direction. Shockingly enough, he also had effusive praise. He said, positions, parties, policies, he could leave considerable debris in his wake. Oh, by the way, yeah, hundreds of people killed in a couple of massacres. I guess that's called debris for Tony Blair. But he had the imagination to know that genuine peace, if attainable with honor and dignity, both for Arabs and Israelis, is the anchor ultimately for Israel's security. Now, that quote might make sense if Ariel Sharon had ever delivered peace, but he didn't. So it was just more war that he delivered. Again, he's a complicated guy. I'm going to get to his positives in a second. Now, apparently the Palestinian leadership didn't see many of those positives. They put out a statement as well. Hanan Ashrawi, a Palestinian official, said he has prepared the foundation for further conflict and undermine the chances of peace by adopting the policy and strategy of militarism, unilateralism, and violence, by acting in a way that the end justifies the means, and by having total disregard for Palestinian lives and rights. Now, what are they referring to? Well, let me get you a list of Ariel Sharon's negatives, and they are considerable. In 1953, he led the infamous Unit 101 commando raid that killed 69 Arabs in the West Bank. Let's pause there for a second to tell you that story. He went in and blew up 45 homes, not of militants or people who were firing back, just 45 homes. He just went into the camp and they're like, oh, look at that, let's blow them up. 69 people happened to be inside those homes and they all died. When they asked Ariel Sharon about that, he said, oh, I thought the houses were empty. Very clever, very cute. those 69 civilians all dead. But you see, he had to execute the Palestinian militants because they're terrorists. They kill innocent civilians. Interesting. All right. And then he was, of course, the mastermind of the brilliant 1982 invasion of Lebanon, which turned out to be an absolute disaster, not just by the issue considered by the Lebanese or the Palestinians, but the rest of the world, and yes, the Israeli government at different points coming out with reports saying, yeah, it didn't turn out that well. Okay. Then, of course, he became complicit in a massacre in the Sabra and Shatila refugee camps. It was led by an Israeli allied militia that killed, hundreds of Palestinians. Now, the people who concluded that, again, was a government commission, not from the government of Lebanon, from the government of Israel. They said what he did was he was indirectly responsible for that massacre, and they banned him from ever being defense minister again. Like I said, he later became prime minister and got around that ban. Now, there were upsides, certainly if you're Israeli, for Ariel Sharon, and for others as well. Now, he had military victories in 1967 and 1973 that were critical to the state of Israel. So if you're an Israeli, you owe him a debt of thanks for that. I understand that completely. In 1973, he apparently disregarded superior officers and led a brilliant assault on the Egyptian army in the Sinai Peninsula, and with just 5,000 men, had a victory that pretty much led to the war going in Israel's direction in 1973. So if you're an Israeli citizen and you love him for that, that part I certainly understand, okay? Now, that doesn't justify the massacres, but if you're an Israeli, I get why you want to put an Israeli flag over what was a war hero at one point and commend him for that. Now, he also founded the centrist Kadima party. Now, that was very important because it leads to positive number 3. He led a historic withdrawal from some portions of the West Bank and all of the Gaza Strip in 2005. He cleared out 25 settlements. Now, that's settlements that he encouraged, so this is ironic credit here. Throughout his entire tenure, when he was in the army, when he was in politics, and when he was a prime minister, he encouraged settlers to no end. Get in there, just take the land, and then we'll worry about it later. It'll help us down the road. But interestingly and ironically, he's the one who took out the settlers from the Gaza Strip and gave it back to the Palestinians. Now, that wound up having a mixed record as well, but I think it was the right thing to do, and it allowed the Palestinians to rule themselves. Then we had a whole host of issues, an election, a Hamas takeover, etc., and then there's been conflict there, so we have not achieved full peace. But it was a step in the right direction, and credit where credit is due. And Ariel Sharon did say it near the end of his life. He said, look, I'm the only guy that could look the Israeli people in the eye and tell them that they must make these compromises. Now, if you think the downsides of Ariel Sharon are too much, and he had the nickname the Butcher of Beirut, so I can understand and sympathize with that point of view. Understand that unfortunately, what came after him was not any better. The current Prime Minister of Israel, Netanyahu, got so mad at Ariel Sharon for withdrawing from the Gaza Strip that he left his government. So the Butcher of Beirut was too soft for the current Prime Minister of Israel. Unfortunately, when you start down a road of militarism and think the only answer is violence, it breeds a culture where at some point even the butcher is considered too soft. And that's unfortunately the current state in the Middle East.